With me today is Erin McCulloch. Erin is an experienced business and executive coach who helps business leaders learn how to run their companies versus their companies running them. Welcome, Erin, and thanks for joining me today.
Oh my gosh, thanks so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
So this podcast is about people's life stories, and Erin, you have a deeply personal story that you're going to share with us today. So you went from a high-functioning special education teacher with a full social calendar who was training for a half marathon to holed up in your house with debilitating anxiety. So could you take us back to that time in your life?
Sure, yeah. So it actually came about through talk therapy. So my boyfriend at the time and I had been on again, off again for like 7 years. And we finally thought, well, maybe we should get some professional help. And so we went to a counseling session. And in that first counseling session, I had a panic attack. And I'd never had one before, so I had no idea what it was. And this was like early 90s. It just wasn't a thing back then quite yet. And so the counselor knew what it was immediately. She explained the whole thing to me and asked me if I'd be willing to do some personal counseling. And I agreed. And through that counseling process, obviously I didn't go from one day high functioning to, holed up in my home, but it happened gradually. And that is kind of how it happens, right? So it was like, I had a panic attack and then I had another one. And then I was training for a race, as you mentioned. And I had a panic attack while I was running, and I was like 4 miles away from my home, and I had to walk home in the rain. I was sobbing, and I just thought I was going to pass out any time. And, so then it was like, oh, I can't run anymore. Right. And then it was, and then I started getting really strict about my diet, and, maybe it was the diet that was making all this happen, and that didn't work. And then I started having them at school in front of my kids, and they were just so traumatized already. Like the last thing they needed was like the one person that they, had in their corner, like passing out in the front of the classroom. And so I just decided that I couldn't work anymore. And it just got narrower and narrower. And about 9 months in, my counselor said, I'd like to refer you to a psychiatrist because we're really not getting any work done here. We're really just dealing with symptoms, not, the root cause. And so she sent me to a homeopathic psychiatrist, and I went, and it was a 3-hour interview. And she gave me a remedy and asked me to wait 20 minutes. And I did, and I left, and about 80% of my anxiety was gone. And I thought, wow, I might actually have a life here. So I decided that, that experience was so traumatic that I thought, I'll just move somewhere like a small town in Hawaii where, paradise, everything's slow. And the issue with that is while I had gotten the chemistry all worked out through the psychiatrist, I hadn't worked on the mental piece all that much because we sort of went right into anxiety. And it took me another probably 10 years. I had a scare. I had started a business immediately upon moving to Hawaii, and it just took off like gangbusters. I mean, it was crazy. And so I was just sort of caught up in all of that and super stressed, high anxiety. And a client called one morning and she was upset about something. I said, I'll be right there. And I would get sort of like crazy about my integrity in my business. And if somebody questioned it, then I would, sort of go off the deep end trying to make it right. And so I did that day. I raced over to my friend's house to drop my daughter off, and I backed into her driveway and sideswiped her husband's truck. And I went and took care of the client. I apologized, and I went and took care of the client, and I came back to her house, and she said, when you hit my husband's truck, my friend was telling me this, he was under it working on it. And he thought the truck was going to land on him. And it just rocked me to my core. And I just went, like, this is not a life, being this stressed out and anxiety ridden. And it wasn't quite the same as like an anxiety disorder, but it was just high levels of stress. And while I had all the things, the things that we all think we're supposed to have in order to be happy, I had the money, I had the successful business, I was amassing houses, I had a nice car, I had all the things, I had time flexibility, I had a daughter. It was never enough. Like I could never, couldn't get enough money. I was always like, oh, I got this monetary goal. Let me shoot for this next one. Let me, and I started doing triathlons. Let me do a longer one. Let me do it faster. Let me, And so, really, why I tell the story is because I want people to understand that it is possible to enjoy your life now in this very moment, regardless of what's going on. And happiness, which there is a distinction between happiness and joy. Happiness is based on external events and things, got a new car, yay, happy for a moment. And then it's fleeting. Whereas joy, when you create an internal experience of joy, which is what I help clients do, that's really about something that's not penetrable by people or circumstances. And I didn't know that as an option. I thought that, I would get all these things that everybody said I needed to have in order to be happy. And the happiness wasn't there. It was fleeting. It was like momentary. And then all of a sudden I was like, oh, I guess that didn't make me happy. I better go after that next thing. And what I want people to understand is that it's never ending. There'll never be enough money. There'll never be a nice enough car. There'll never be a big enough house. And so searching for it through those things is not going to get you to enjoying that life.
So do you think, sort of winding it back a bit, do you think somebody could have told you that at the time and you would have listened to them? Or is it something that you had to go through for you to understand that you were trying to attain something that you were never going to sort of reach?
No. I definitely, everybody could have told me all the things. I mean, I knew that, like we all know that, right? It's sort of like part of our lore is, money doesn't buy happiness. And I mean, shoot, I think about my clients in that business they're multi-billionaires, multi-millionaires, products that we all use, everybody knows about. These people own these businesses. They are some of the most miserable people I've ever met. But it's still like in my brain, I didn't put it together somehow, and so, that car situation, almost killing my friend's husband, really started to get me thinking that, life could be different. Like it doesn't have to be like this. I wasn't sure how to go about it. So I started, the usual, going to seminars and reading all the books. And so I started to recognize there was a different life to be had. And then a few years later, I was going through a divorce and it just leveled me. And I thought, I spent tens of thousands of dollars on these seminars and here I am in a divorce and I've got no strategies. I literally have nothing to draw on at this particular moment. And I just felt lost. And I started reading this book. Maybe you've heard of it. It's called A Course in Miracles. So it's a book. So it's 365 passages. It's meant to be one passage a day for a year. And so I started the book because somebody had recommended it. And I'll tell you, the first month, nothing. I was just kind of like, well, that's nice, but still not helping. And then I had this weird thing happen, month 2, where I started reading the book. And every time I opened the book to the passage, the words that were popping up off the page were joy. The answer is joy. The path is joy. I just kept seeing joy everywhere. And I was just like, I hear you. And how do I get there? And so, as it were, I got an email from a gentleman I'd met through the seminar company that I had been with for a long time. And he had a seminar coming up and I bought it. I had no idea what it was. And I went, and it was a seminar on the visualization process that he teaches. And I came home totally fired up and I called up my broker who had my business for sale for like 9 months. And I was like, I just want to let you know my business is going to sell by the end of the month and there's going to be a bidding war. And he was like, okay. And it did. A week later, went into a bidding war, sold, went into escrow, and then I met the love of my life in these very, what I would have said before, random circumstances, but I don't believe in that anymore. And then I went and trained with that gentleman who did the visualization seminar to teach a seminar that he teaches on law of attraction and beliefs and intuition and those sorts of things. And I taught that seminar for a couple of years. And in teaching that seminar, the first one I put on, it was like a culmination of everything that I had ever done came like right at that moment. I ditched my notes and I was just like, this is what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to teach people how to find their joy and cultivate it daily and recognize their beliefs and dismantle them and create the life that they've always wanted to live. And so that's what I've been doing for the last 3 years.
So you found your calling.
Yeah.
So do you think that you personally had to open yourself up? Because as you mentioned, you'd been to a lot of, seminars and things like that, and you didn't have any sort of strategies from that. So do you think it came a point in your time where you opened yourself up to the possibility of something working for you, and that mindset shift helped you sort of take all that in?
I think we can only hear when we're ready. So, I don't have the opportunity, or haven't taken the opportunity to go back to some of those seminars and think if there was something more deeper there, a higher consciousness level maybe there or something. I don't know. I mean, I think that's, I like to tell my clients that, you don't have to actually go through turmoil in order to grow and learn. But it's like the quickest way, right? Because it's that moment where you're just like, I can't take it anymore. Like, I don't want to feel like this anymore. So, I think that through that process, it's just like that letting go, right? It's it's the finally giving into what is, right? Versus the butting up against and being in resistance to all the time. And I think that's how the majority of people, certainly was my experience for most of my life, was, let me just, be in resistance to everything that is, because I think I know how everything's supposed to look and how everybody's supposed to behave in order for me to feel good about me. And now I recognize that those are just beliefs that I created a long time ago. And when I stop trying to make everybody make me feel better and just make me feel better myself, then I enjoy my life.
So I think, you said that people don't have to go through turmoil to be able to, to feel those things. But in a sense, like you don't want to listen to anybody, and you don't want to open yourself up to those things until you've gone to that point where I suppose you need that help. So is that what you found?
That
you needed to have that fulfillment, you needed to find that answer to be able to let yourself accept that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know exactly how the universe works, except that I know that it's supporting us. It's really divine in its unfolding. I mean, it couldn't be any more in our favor. Somehow I just feel like we kind of got it backwards. Like, it was like challenges are the things that we butt up against. It's actually the opposite. It's like when you have a challenge, that's where growth is. And, I don't want to sound cliche or like, maybe some other guru type people, but the reality is like, we're here to do that work. That's what we're here for. It's not any of this other stuff that people will have you believe about, amassing things. Because guarantee on your deathbed, you are not thinking, I wish I had worked more. I wish I had more things, right? You're thinking, I wish I had deeper, meaningful relationships with people. I wish that I had, was present in my life. I mean, gosh, I'll just speak for myself. I used to spend a huge, if not all of my time thinking about what was going to happen in the future versus just being here now in this moment. And I think a lot of people live that way. It's not our fault. We just have it backwards. It's just like the things that we're concentrating on that we think are going to make us feel good aren't the things. And so it's just sort of like we need to go in reverse now and recognize that, I'm totally for, don't get me wrong. Like, I love stuff too, like I like abundance on all levels. I got my eye on a car that I like to have and all those things, but I know that the happiness is not there. Or maybe the happiness, the, brief momentary thing, but the joy is definitely not there. Because that car is just going to be a car after a month or whatever.
So I did read a quote on your Instagram, and it said, if it's not going to matter in 5 years, don't spend more than 5 minutes being upset by it. And I really love that rule. But I wanted to know, if you're in a dark place, how do you shift your mind to understand that not everything that you get upset about matters?
Well, so one thing I'd like to help people understand is that you are not the thoughts that you're thinking, and you're not the emotions that you're having. And how I can prove that to you is you can think a thought and recognize what that thought is. You can think a thought and go, oh, I just had this thought about that, right? So who is that that's having the thought, right? And it's the same with emotions. You can have an emotion and name that emotion. So who's naming the emotion? I would like people to understand that, while we are taught to think that our thoughts and our emotions are who we are, and it is part of the experience that we're having, the who we really are, whatever you want to call that, your soul or your essence or whatever, that is the deepest part of who you actually are. And that's all loving, all kind, creative, all the things, all the wonderful, beautiful things that people like to ascribe to, God or universe or divinity or whatever. Those all live in you. And how I know that is because we came from that. How could we come from that and not be part of it? We are. And so when we understand that we aren't our thoughts and we aren't our emotions, then we can become separate from them. And so, and the other piece is recognizing that you can control your thoughts and you can control your emotions. Recognizing that, just because I have a thought, it's a pattern of, we're so habitual as humans. Like we do everything. That we get up, we brush our teeth, go to the bathroom, have a cup of coffee, all the things. That is throughout every part of our life. So the thoughts you're thinking, they're over and over and over again, same ones every day. And so when you are in that dark place, you have to find a thought that's higher than the one you're at. I'm not saying, I call this positive shaming. It drives me crazy when people are like, well, my life is horrible. Let me tell you about it. But I'm blessed, so I can't complain. It's like, it's okay to tell your story and be in it for a minute and be in that emotion for a minute, but recognize that it's not who you are. And so when you're in that dark place and you're having those thoughts, I'll ask you to what I call ladder up to a different emotional state that is higher than the one you're in. And I'm not saying go from like depressed to joy, like that's too far, right? If you can get some neutrality in there and go to one that's less traumatic, then you can begin to go, oh, okay, in this space, it feels, maybe it's just sad or, blue, right? Versus depressed. And then you just kind of work your way up to the next one so that you don't have, it doesn't feel so large, the distance that you have to gap. And then when you get into that space, you start, activities like, what can I find in this moment that has value, right? So that puts you in the present moment, because you cannot simultaneously be in a low level experience, which is anything that doesn't feel good, and a high level experience at the same time. It's impossible. So when you ladder up, you just begin to have the conversation with yourself. Say it's with, you have a moment, you're having a hard time at work, your boss is, yelling at you or whatever, or giving a hard time. How you begin that laddering process is you recognize where you might be able to meet. I'm grateful for the fact that he makes payroll and I get my paycheck every time he says he's going to, right? That's a beautiful thing. Then you go to the next thing. I recognize that sometimes he gives me a hard time, but sometimes he does actually, give me an attaboy or a kudo for doing something right. He doesn't, he's not breathing down my neck every single day, so you just start to like, you got to search sometimes, right? You get in that place and it's like, can't find that thing, but you got to search and search and search and make that the effort versus staying in that thought pattern of, oh, this doesn't feel good. And let me find other things that don't feel good, right? To go the opposite way, because that's how my mind worked. I would go, oh, a client complained. Oh, and then there's this other thing. Oh, and this other person didn't pay. And then this, right? I went to that place, which is where I think a lot of people go to. It's like, if one thing happens bad, let me add on all these other things that aren't working out, right? But I think when you take a moment to look at your life and recognize all that, like literally millions of things that are going right, that we've, again, focused on the wrong thing. We're focusing on that maybe handful of things that aren't working out versus, going, I have a roof over my head right now. Thank you. I have some food to eat. I have electricity. I have a phone I can use that's basically a mini computer. I can do all kinds of crazy stuff on, right? So it's like, it's just really an issue of switching the focus and gently, let's all be nice to ourselves. It's hard out there.
Because I wanted to ask, so anxiety and I suppose sadness and those sort of emotions, they're normal, healthy emotions. So how does somebody know if their response to something is proportionate or not?
That's a good question. Nobody's ever asked me that before. I mean, yeah, it's hard. Mental health is it's tricky, right? Because the difference between having a lot of anxiety and a lot of panic attacks and having like a full-on anxiety disorder, I mean, there's quite the difference. And when you're in the middle of it, it's pretty challenging to kind of go, I always am telling people all the time, it's like, it's hard to see ourselves, right? When we're inside the jar trying to read the ingredients on the outside of the jar, like can't see them. And it's the same for us. We're just too close. And so, my thing would be, find somebody who's going to give you not only like somebody who will tell you the truth, but in a kind way, like, I feel like I'm a little bit, I don't know, cracking up here. Like, am I like off base here, right? I mean, that's why, relationships with romantic relationships they're the relationship besides the one with yourself. The one with yourself first, romantic relationships second. And I say that because you cannot get feedback on yourself by yourself. It's really challenging. But when you butt up with another person and there are things they do that agitate you and all of that, that's where growth happens. And so, that's that opportunity. I mean, sometimes you can find that in a friendship. It's a little harder sometimes because there's not enough skin in the game. But yeah, it's just, ask somebody that cares about you that will tell you the truth. Like, this is what's going on for me right now. It feels a little bit more than just, a regular amount of stress or anxiety. Am I off base here? And I know there's a lot of shame in like recognizing like I might need some help here, and that's a challenging piece. A lot, most of my clients have anxiety, a lot of stress, overwhelmed, worry, and for them, they're super high functioning people in general because they're entrepreneurs, they're leaders in companies. And, for them to reach out is challenging because usually everybody's looking to them for the answers. And so I'll just say there's no shame in checking in with, especially somebody that you trust. Just saying, this is the experience I'm having right now. Can I get a little feedback? I think that's important.
So I think mental health is something that's spoken a lot more freely about, especially in Australia. We're much more comfortable now than what we were, 5, 10, 15 years ago. Do you find that in the US, is it the same sort of thing where it's becoming the norm to be able to talk about your emotions and to seek out that help? Or do you still think there's a really, big blocker in that stigma that's associated with it?
There's definitely still some stigma. It's moving in what I consider the right direction. I don't believe in right and wrong, but it's moving in a direction of kindness, recognizing. Sometimes I work with companies on that very thing because A lot, I don't know if this happens in Australia, but here, we just get so concerned with the bottom line, we forget that there are actual like human beings involved, and human capital is huge, and that's your biggest piece in business. And if you can't figure out how to value people as humans, you're not going to get the bottom line handled anyway. So, yeah, I mean, there's a shift definitely happening. There's, EQ and that sort of thing. But I think we're going to, I think we're getting even broader in recognizing that, especially people in leadership positions, because leadership is top down, that they need to be more well-rounded as leaders, and recognize the people that are, on their team, and how to, that EQ, where you recognize other people's, what's going on for them, the empathy and those sorts of things that has been lacking for some time, for sure, in the US.
So obviously, the more leaders that reach out and, ask for help around those sort of areas, the better things are going to be, because if they can look after themselves, they can look after their people much better. So what do you work with your clients to get them into that sort of mindset?
Well, most of my clients come when they're in some sort of crisis, or they are in a transition where they want to, they recognize that they want something different. Either it's they're wanting their business to grow, or they're wanting to step away more, or retire, or whatever. And so they're sort of all ready. They're ready for something. The challenging part is, you take somebody who's linear, that thinks in a linear fashion, black and white, that's in a leadership position and has been for decades, and getting them to understand that, first of all, it's okay to have emotions, even at the workplace. And secondly, that there might be different tools out there that, maybe would have been classified as woo-woo in the past, that are highly effective. And there's a ton of research backing, things like meditation and visualization, and, and all the things that we know are good for mental health and good for leadership. And so, I love, of course, seeing transformation. That's awesome. But for me, the challenging part is when I get a client is I've got to meet them where they're at. And sometimes they have zero experience. Like, I have clients, I teach them strategies, and they're like, yeah, no, I'm not going to do that. And I'm like, why? Because I look like an idiot, or I feel like a fool, or, and I just, and sometimes they're not ready to hear the deeper, like, what's actually going on behind the scenes stuff, or to do a deep dive into what some of these belief systems structures they have in place that are making decisions for them. They're not ready to hear that yet. So I have to sort of navigate to what they are able to hear, which, keeps it interesting, but it is, we're all on a different path and different journey and a different location on that path. So it's like, trying to, get everybody to understand the basics, which are, some of the things that we just talked about, with the thoughts and the emotions and the beliefs, right? To me, that's it. Those are the things, that you're not your thoughts, that you're not your emotions, and that your beliefs are running the show. And if you don't know what those beliefs are, then somebody else is in charge, and you can't be intentional from that place.
So how do you find giving your clients feedback, especially when you don't feel that they're at that place to receive exactly what you want to tell them? How do you navigate around that and I suppose, give them what they can tolerate at that time? Or do you tend to push the boundaries a little bit?
I mean, my position is I have to push the boundaries a little bit, but I like to use humor. I just think that, it's funny when we can laugh at ourselves and the things that we do. And so I try to find ways, I try to understand what's humorous to them and figure out a way to say it that, we can chuckle about it, and also know at the same time that it's serious, because most of my clients are males, and, they are black and white thinkers. And I tend to be on that end also. And so I feel like I bridge the gap for them. And humor is a really great way for them. With women, I don't use as much humor because we just think, like, literally our brains are wired differently. And so I don't have to use humor. Like, most of my female clients are ready to go there. That's why they've contacted me. They've probably already done a little bit of work. They've maybe even had some sort of coaching before, or read books or whatever. It's just I don't know about in Australia. I assume it's similar, and maybe it's changing or changed a lot. But we raised men in our country for decades. It's not really happening anymore, but for decades to not have any emotions, or the only emotion they were allowed to have was anger, basically. So they can get angry and in people's faces, but women, we're allowed to have emotions to a point, right? We're not allowed to like burst into tears all the time. But sometimes you do what you got to do. I mean, it's happening. It's happening. And that's a lot of the work that I do is like allowing people to have their emotions. Like, it's like, even from a little kid age, we're like telling these little kids, oh, it's okay. It's okay. It's like, they get to have emotions. It's okay. They didn't get to have the toy they wanted. They didn't, they fell down and hurt themselves. Like, I'm saying, have the emotion, sit in the emotion for a minute. Like, you want to, like, the healing takes place in sitting in that emotion. We band-aid it with so many things, like, wine, alcohol, drugs, those are the obvious ones, but there's so many more. Media, binge watching TV, reading. I know tons of people who just voraciously read. That is checking out of your life, right? You can't both be simultaneously present moment and in a book, right? Or going to the movies a lot. Like, and there's even things that are even more subtle than that. Food, also, gambling, right? All the things. We're doing it all the time. We never, from a young age, we don't allow kids, and then as they grow up, it's certainly not acceptable to like sit in your emotions. We because we're the ones going, oh, it's okay, honey. Like, we need them to feel better. So that's another like belief, right? It's like, I want you to stop crying because that makes me feel uncomfortable, right? And so that whole nonsense of not being in your emotion while you're having it, tamping it down for so long, is what's causing a lot of mental health issues.
So as you said, you work a lot with men, and the only sort of emotion that they're taught to have is sort of anger. So do you see a recurring theme with the clients that you have? And then what advice would you give to other people that, might be experiencing a similar sort of, emotion or time in their life?
Yeah, I mean, the similarities are sort of astounding to my own life, right? Because that's what we do. When we're in a profession like mine, it's like, who's attracted to me are the people who have the same things that I had, right? And that's on purpose, right? Because obviously I can't help people. I mean, I can be empathetic and I can be sympathetic, but if you have anxiety, I know anxiety, 100%. I can tell you all about it. I can tell you how to get over it and prevent it from happening. You have depression. That's part of anxiety, and I definitely had some of that, but it wasn't clinical. So if that's the thing, then obviously you want to go with somebody who really has that specific need. And so, some of the things that I notice about clients is the same things that I had, which is the overthinking, right? It's like thinking things to death. And it's even more than, it is overthinking, right? It's like, oh, I'm going to try and find a solution to all these things, everything that comes up in my life. But it gets even more insidious than that. It gets into this, what I call circular thinking, which is where there's actually no resolution to it. It's just, let me just think about this thing over and over again and let it swim around in my brain a billion times with no resolution. And so I teach people, because that's one of those traits for anxiety and overwhelm, is this line of constantly thinking about things and thinking that that thinking is going to create a decision or a result. And so I teach people how to disrupt that line of thinking. First, you have to get awareness that it's happening and recognize it. And then once you have the awareness, like I teach people to start talking to that circular thinking in a way that's, so when you hear it, and often it's the same, like it's the same stuff. I mean, it might have a different person involved. It might have it be a different event, but it's the same circumstance. It's the same, because that's what we're here to do, is that work specific to you, whatever that thing is. So that same thing swimming around. And then when you hear that pattern of thinking, then what I teach people to do is to begin to acknowledge it and just say, that's not true. So I just say it casually, neutrally. That's not true. It keeps going. I'll say, that's not true. So then I get a little bit forceful. And then if it continues, I will literally, and sometimes I would say that's not true in my mind, because if it's not appropriate. If it gets to the point where you recognize it's happening, that's not enough, like the neutrality of you just disrupting your brain like that, I will like snap my finger and I'll go, enough, right?
Wow.
And you can feel when you say enough with some force behind it, it's like you're talking to a little kid, right? But you're talking to your little kid, like who you were at a little age. And you're saying, you're like scolding them kind of, right? Not for the purpose of shame or any of those things, for the purpose of your brain going like, wait a minute, what's going on here? We were on our thing that we do all the time. We're in our habit of thinking about things and trying to find a solution, which is not coming. It disrupts it just long enough for you to insert something else there. And so I'll typically have people, think of something that brings them joy, whether it's like a child or a memory. Like I have a client who loves puppies, so she's got like puppies everywhere. And so she gets into that line of thinking. She goes, oh, puppy. She pulls up puppies and shift, right? So just like anything else, you can't go to the gym and lift one weight and be buff, right? It's a practice. So you got to practice being aware. You got to practice hearing those words. You got to practice that scenario. Then you got to practice stopping your brain from doing, it's just habit. It's not intending to do what it's doing. It's what we told it we were supposed to do, which is think everything to death, and that was going to come up with a solution. But what people start to recognize is that the solution doesn't come in the overthinking. It comes when we stop, when we finally give up resistance to what is. Then we go to sleep, I can't think about it anymore. I'm just going to go to sleep. Go to sleep and you wake up, I have an idea. Right? Because you stopped that line of thinking. That line of thinking is of no use. But the subconscious mind doesn't know that. It thinks we've told it how to behave, and now we have to tell it how to behave differently. But it's a practice, and it has to be practiced over and over and over and over again to get intentional about it. And you have to do it until it's like tick marks. It's like each time you do it on the side that you want, then less energy on the other side. And then do it again, less energy until there's none over there. And then your norm becomes what you decided. That's how you get intentional.
I think as well, people sometimes just need somebody else to help them snap out of things. And I think it sounds like, Erin, that you do that for a lot of people and hold them to account, and you're able to change their mindset and to bring them out of that place of anxiety and overthinking and I suppose trauma, to be able to overcome that and to become successful people. And I have one question for you, Erin, that I think will really suit you today. And that is, what would you do differently if only you knew?
Yeah. If you'd asked me this years ago, I would have said, I would have done, I would have built my business differently. I would have done all these other things differently. I would have, maybe gotten, different mental health care or, but I truly believe, like we were talking about before, that the universe, again, so exquisite in its design to show us where growth can happen and should be happening. Like, this is literally why I believe we are here, is to recognize when we're upset, and instead of saying that person made me feel this way or that circumstance made me feel this way, where am I in that? Where is the hurt and the trauma and the healing that needs to take place in me? Like, every single time. It's not that joker in traffic. It's not that coworker. It's not my husband. It's not anybody but me. Like, I am in charge of my experience, and that's the work that needs to be done here, as in my estimation, is, when we can recognize that nobody's doing anything to us, we're the ones that are creating all of this and blaming it on other people. It seems kind of ridiculous, but it is really what's happening. And we forget, that like, my experience is very different than your experience, because it's all based on past things that have happened that we try to project into the future. Like, we constantly think that X equals Y in every scenario, and it doesn't, like 99% of the time, ever work out that way. But we don't go, wait a minute, that didn't work out. I thought this was I did this was supposed to happen, it didn't happen. We just keep rolling along, sort of unconscious. And so these are the kind of conversations where if anybody's listening to this, they're obviously interested in trying to figure out, like, what the heck's going on here in this world and this life? Like, why are we here? What are we doing? And this is what we're doing. We're literally like having our own experience and pretending like everybody else is having the same experience as us. And then we're shocked when they don't do the things that we want them to do so that we feel good about our life. And the sooner, and now, like, for me, the experience I have is that it's like a movie, like, I'm sitting here and I'm watching all the people in my life do all the things, and I just go, whoa, that's that belief that they have about that. Whoa, they're in reaction to that thing over there. And it's fascinating to look at it this way, because when you do that, then you can truly be with those people, because then it's not like you're offended or you're upset about anything. You're just like, oh, you're behaving that way because you have beliefs that are telling you this is what's right and wrong. And then we can just be kinder to each other, and just go, yeah, she's working on that thing. There's an issue.
So what I'm taking from that is you need to be accountable for yourself, to yourself.
100%. Your soulmate is you. It's not the relationship. It's not the friendships. It's not the family. The relationship you are here to work on is you. How you do that is with other people. But the relationship you want to heal is with you 100%.
That's such great insight, Erin. And I just wanted to thank you so much for joining us here today on the If Only You Knew podcast. And if you'd like to know more about Erin, you can follow her on Instagram, LinkedIn, and Facebook. I believe you're on, Erin. And I'll also have a link to all of Erin's socials and her full bio on my podcast, on my website, ifonlyyouKnewpodcast.com.au. Thanks, Erin.
Thank you.